But we live in a very crazy world that's vying for our attention. 24/7. There's always entertainment at hand. You just need to look down on your phone. There's various apps. I'm not sure what apps you look at, but religiously, when I wake up in the morning, I look at the BBC app, I look at the Facebook app, I look at the LinkedIn app, and my wife often reminds me about the Bible app that I should be reading prior to looking at those things. And a lot of us, when you get to Friday nights and you chat to people about how their week's going, people seem busy, overscheduled, and feel rather burnt out. And this last 2 weeks, I felt it especially. I mean, I'm only 35 years old, for those who were wondering. I wake up in the mornings and I feel like, can I really do this? You know, can I really get to work and get through this day? And I'm reminded that I've still got 25 years to work. At least. So I better get my attitude right. And it dawns on me that this is a marathon that we're all running. Sometimes we don't know when the marathon will end, and some of us live short lives. But it is a marathon, and we need to be able to train ourselves accordingly. Because I think for myself, often I'm training as if it's a sprint. Today we're going to look at some of the solutions for this problem of this busy life, this burnt out feeling. And the sermon is entitled, if you're making notes, Learning How to Slow Down. This is a foreign concept. This is a foreign concept. You know, I come from Cape Town, as you might or might not know, and it was known as the Mother City. The reason why it was known as the Mother City, because things take 9 months to happen. People are laid back, and things are slow, and I'm sure Rob will find out when he's doing business, that things are slower in Cape Town. And then coming to England, I found myself really shocked. I remember getting off the train and going to Paddington for the first time in my suit as a 24-year-old, joining this rat race and thinking, goodness, there's a pace here, there's a pulse. And, but I think as Christians, we need to learn how to slow down. Turn your Bibles to Philippians chapter 4, and we'll read verse 12. Philippians 4, verse 12. Paul writes, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. This is an amazing scripture. We've all read it many times. Paul's going through a tough time, and he says, I've learned the secret of being content. Now, all of us have been in situations where we've had enough, and all of us have been in situations where we have had a need. But Paul says that he's got the secret of how to be happy, whether we've got a lot or whether we have nothing. If we look at the Message translation, it's quite interesting. It says, I have found the recipe for being happy, whether full or hungry, hands full or hands empty. You know, Paul says, I have have the recipe for being happy no matter what the circumstances are. He knows the ingredients. He knows the attitudes of heart that's required. He knows the mindset that brings contentment into our lives. The question I've got to ask you is, do you want to know that recipe? Who feels burnt out? Okay, so at least 30% of us feel burnt out. Some are too burnt out to put their hands up. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the recipe, some of the solutions that I think will help us to slow down before we kill ourselves. And the first, if we look at the word slow, I'm going to use S.L.O.W. So the first one is S. Stop the constant push for more. Take a look in Ecclesiastes 4 verse 6. Stop the constant push for more. Ecclesiastes 4 verse 6 says, better one handful with tranquility than 2 handfuls with toil and chasing after the wind. This is the wisest man who ever lived on the planet, and he had everything, right? The Bible reminds us of all the things that he had. I've been a bit jealous about Solomon when I've read Ecclesiastes, because I consider myself quite ambitious, and I remember wanting something, and then I would just rather pray for wisdom and hope that God gives me the thing that I'm actually wanting. But unfortunately, God knows my heart, and I don't get those things. But the point is that Solomon is saying, better one handful. The King James Version says, better is a handful with quietness than both the hands full with travail and vexation of spirit. What we need to realize is that less is oftentimes more. But what do we want as people? We want the 2 hands. The 2 hands full. We grow up and live in a society that says unless both your hands are full, you aren't a success. But God says often 2 handfuls come with travail. Now travail means toil and struggle. And vexation of spirit. Vexation means aggravation, exasperation, anger, and displeasure. That's what you get when you're chasing after the 2 handfuls. You know, some might say, but I'm ambitious. You know, I'm an ambitious person. I can't help it. I want the 2 hands full. You know, having ambition isn't wrong. But ambition without boundaries is terrible in your life. Ambitions without boundaries destroys marriages. Husbands too busy at work. I found myself there. I come home, but I'm not really there. The kids are talking to me, but I'm not really listening. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about the appointment. I'm thinking about the promotion. I'm thinking about next quarter. I'm thinking about how can I get more. It destroys families. You know, presidents and dictators that have ambition without boundaries destroy countries. Wars begin because of ambition that doesn't have boundaries. You see, our ambition needs to be measured in our lives. You know, and the starting point to bringing balance into your life, unfortunately, does not start by clearing your schedule, taking 1 or 2 appointments out. Because taking 1 or 2 appointments out of your schedule doesn't deal with your heart. If our hearts want more constantly, we will clear the diary with a few appointments, and then we will fill them up again with more appointments. I want to encourage you to deal with your heart and not your schedule. The L in S.L.O.W, I want to say S.L.O.W, so I work for a company called S.L.O.W. Can't get it out of my system. The L in S.L.O.W is learn to say no. Who struggles with saying no? Yeah. Take a look in Titus, Titus 2. We read there verse 11 and 12. Titus 2 says, "For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled and upright and godly lives in this present age." The scripture says that the love that we've experienced and the grace that we've received from God should give us the ability to say no to worldly passions. I've read that scripture many times, and I've constantly just thought it means say no to sin. And I would constantly think my obvious sins, like don't swear, or don't, impurity, or whatever the case might be. But it could also be to a very selfish schedule. The ability to say no is one of the most liberating things on the planet. It's powerful. You know, for me at the moment, I don't know if you saw my Facebook update today, but I'm officially in training as of today. I went for a run to go and climb Kilimanjaro next year. And that's going to be a mammoth task. One, because I'm not as fit as I need to be right now. And 2, I'm scared of heights. Okay, the second one I can't do much about, but I'm going to have to sort out the first part. But the point is that for the next 6 months, when I'm really tired and don't want to get onto the treadmill, I'm going to have to say no to my desire to want to just sit on the sofa. When I see the girls with their cupcakes that they've baked with Anna, I'm going to have to say no to my desire to want to eat the cupcake. How about you when your boss asks you to commit to another project? When you know that the time that you already have is already impacting on your family. The ability to say no. In church, it's so easy for us to overschedule ourselves, even with spiritual activities. And we don't want to say no. You know, you can go and spend £2,000 on a business seminar in time management, and you can just think of these 2 letters, and if you can learn them, then you wouldn't have to spend the £2,000, that's to say no. You know, the number 1 reason for our lives and schedules getting overloaded and feeling burnt out is due to us saying yes to too many people. We feel the pressure, right? To say yes to our bosses and our friends. We are afraid of disappointing, offending, or being rude. Especially in the church, it's difficult when someone asks you to, come out and spend some time, we're going to do some fun things. You know, you feel like, what am I going to do? I'm just going to sit at home anyway. You sort of feel guilty and you go through that, and you go, yes. But soon after saying yes, it catches up with us. We're stressed out. We regret our decisions. Why is my life so crazy? Who of us have been there before? Yeah? The funny thing is it's easier to get into things than it is to get out of things. You know, it's easier to get into debt. It's difficult to get out of debt. It's easier to get into trouble. Ask my daughters at the moment. It's easier to get into a relationship than it is to get out. It's easier to gain weight, speaking to the married men, than it is to lose weight. But just because I could do it does not mean I should do it. You know, sometimes you can use a bit of an analogy. Anna tells me, "Can you go to the shop for us, please?" I'll go, "Gotta be humble. Okay, I'll go to the shop." And she says, "Can you get some bread and milk?" Two things, right? Two, bread and milk. So I go down to the shop, bread and milk, and you walk around the shop, and what do? You see something else, then you go, "Oh, maybe we're going to run out of that." And you quickly grab that, and then see some sweets on the side there, you quickly grab that. Before you know it, you've got 23 items. And the stuff's dripping off you. You don't have a basket because you initially were just going to get two things. Don't know if there's other men who can relate. But the point is, life can be like that sometimes. We collect things. During the week, we go into the week, and the week looks pretty normal. By the end of the week, we've adopted 20 new things in our schedule. You know, some of us need to go on an activity diet. We need to start creating my not to do lists. We can't stop adding things to our lives. You know, you get some people who are absolutely just add loads of things. You know, president of the Pigeon Club, and, you know, PhD after with 3 kids, and, you know, it's amazing how much stuff we can throw at ourselves. I want us to look at the third point, which is the O in S.L.O.W, which is obey the 4th commandment. Who can tell me what the 4th commandment is? Okay, let's read it then. Let's turn our Bibles to Exodus 20, and we'll read there from verse 8 to 11. Exodus 20, verse 8 to 11. It says, "Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all in that is in them, but he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy." Now, we're not going to go into the Old Covenant because it's the Old Testament, and clearly we're not bound by the 10 Commandments. But I did find it quite interesting. You know, after the 10 Commandments, God's going to start reeling out, I think, around about 880 commandments on how the Israelites should live. But he focuses on 10 big ones. Do not murder. Do not be adulterous. And then somewhere in there he says, make sure that you rest. God says it's important to rest. You know, there was an interview done with children. They said, what would you request from your parents if there was one thing? A lot of people said that it's probably going to be spending more time. But majority of the children said, I wish mom and dad weren't tired all the time. You know, we run ourselves silly. We weren't designed to be going 24/7, 7 days a week. Let's look at the purpose of the Sabbath. The first purpose is resting your body. You know, it's important to switch off. And when I say switch off, what you need to try and embrace is switching off the phone. I realized whilst doing this sermon that I'm 150% addicted to my phone. 150%. Like if I lose it, I start getting anxious. I can feel it in my body that there's something wrong. I don't have my phone. I don't even feel the same way when Anna's gone to the shop. Do you know what I mean? I feel more anxious about my phone than I do about my wife not being with me. No, I'm just being honest. During the French Revolution, they decided to cancel rest on the Sunday because they had to build the nation. And they got people to work harder and to build the city. And very quickly they realized that the nation's health was plummeting. And so they reinstated rest on a Sunday. God knows what we need. But what do we do on our days off? I'll tell you what I do. I catch up on the email that I didn't send on the 6 days of work. You know, and somehow we wonder why we're stressed out. We blame our spouses. We blame our children. Sometimes it's just because we can't cope. You say, why is my health impacted? We need to rest our bodies. Secondly, the importance of a Sabbath is that we need to recharge our emotions. Take a look in 1 Kings 19, and we're going to do a bit of a study here. 1 Kings 19, about a guy who was a bit burnt out. I want you to stay with me. This is a very important point. Remember, we're learning how to slow down, so don't ask me to fasten to speed up the service. We're going to slow it down. It's a good test, isn't it? Especially for those who've got dinner appointments afterwards. Let's slow it down. 1 Kings 19, it says, Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done, and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over the coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he got up, ate and drank, and strengthened by that food, he travelled for 40 days and for 40 nights, until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. So just to give you some context quickly, you know, Elijah began his ministry in the northern kingdom of Israel. And it's whilst a guy called Ahab, who was a very bad king, was king of Israel. And even worse, he was married to Jezebel. who we all know is regarded as one of the most evil women in the entire Bible. Now, if you ever wanted a gig, that's definitely one. That's definitely one for one to take a challenge on. So these guys were running the country at the time, and his gig was to effectively bring back the nation to spirituality. Wow, that's really cool, isn't it? But guess what? God arranges a drought. As if that wasn't bad. You know, he arranges a drought for 7 years. So who's had a tough week? It's sobering reading the scriptures sometimes. I do sometimes thank God that I was definitely not born in these times. I don't know how I would have handled these situations, but God's good, right? So God brings around a drought, and he tells Elijah, listen, go and live at a camp next to a stream. And something like out of Lord of the Rings, the ravens came down and fed him. It's amazing how God did look after Elijah. However, this stream dries up. Oh, another gig. And God says to him, listen, go and find this lady, who we all know as Zarephath, the widow, and she'll give you some food. So little does he know, he starts walking and he knocks on her door, and Zarephath's there, and he goes, listen, I'm here, can you please feed me? And she's a bit like, what are you asking me for food in this drought? I've got a little bit of oil and a little bit of flour, and that's enough to make my son and I, she had a one and only son, a meal, and then we're probably going to die. And Elijah goes, well, have faith in me, because God sent me. And we all know that God blesses her, and it becomes a bottomless pit of oil and flour. So Elijah must have thought, oh, fired up now, look, I've done a good thing. And guess what? The widow's son dies. Right, he rocks up, causes miracle, and he pleads to God and says, God, please save his life. And God does nothing. He says, come on, God, you know, you're making me look a bit bad over here. And he begs him again, and he begs him 3 times, and God raises her son from the dead, and he's alive. And then Elijah moves on, you know, because of this drought. Jezebel gets all the prophets together. We all know the story. 450 prophets rock up, and there's an altar, and they have this deal going on. You know, and Elijah rocks up there, the only guy that's rooting for God. It must have been quite a lonely experience. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where there's 450 of the other and just one of you. I know it's even tough when you're playing football and there's 7 on their side and 5 on your side. But the point is, it's a tough situation. And but God pulls through. And you know, he kills these 450 prophets. And then Jezebel comes and says, listen, I'm going to kill you. No matter about the 450 prophets that he beat, Jezebel comes as wicked woman and says, I'm going to kill you, and threatens him, and he runs away. It's amazing how scary women are. But the point is that he's fed up. He's emotionally drained. He said, Lord, I've had enough. Have you ever been there? When you've just had enough? But he goes to a tree and falls asleep. And God sends an angel. It's amazing how beautiful that depiction is of this angel really cooking for him, which is in effect God cooking a meal for him. And looking after him and recharging him. But somehow he's only recharging the body, but not quite the soul. You know, he hasn't had a chance to revitalize himself spiritually yet. So let's read on in verse 10 to 13 of 1 Kings 19. It says, he replied, I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. The voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? You know, he's on the road to recovery, but he still needs spiritual recovery. And God demonstrates his power. A real twister comes and thrashes the rocks, but God's not in that. An earthquake erupts. We don't know what it is on the Richter scale, but let's assume it's a 10. But he's not in the earthquake. And a fire comes, but he's not in the fire. God comes in a whisper. What's amazing is that when you're emotionally exhausted and tired, God knows what to do and how to meet you. God knew Elijah needed one-on-one time. The problem is, guys, is that if we're running 24/7 at 100 miles an hour, we won't have time to hear the whisper. We're rushing from one end to the next, from one appointment to the next. We don't hear the whisper. We have to learn to slow down. We have to learn how to hear God's voice. So the long and short of it is that God says, you're not alone, to Elijah, and gives him a friend, Elisha. And he moves from this burnt out to balanced. And he's spiritually strengthened. We need to set aside time to rest physically, emotionally, and spiritually. You know, sometimes we hear about meditation and all of us get a bit like, ooh, those funny people who meditate. Yeah. You know, but I think there's a lot of wisdom there. You know, I don't know, we're all in different phases of life, and you might be sat there thinking, yeah, right, Marlon, how am I supposed to get this balance? I've got 2 young kids. I've got 3 young kids. I've got 10 young kids. It doesn't even matter whether you've got kids or not. Emotionally, we all build differently. We all have a need. I want to encourage you to work it out for yourself once a week, to take the time out. If you're married and you've got kids, work a plan with your spouse. Husbands, give your wives the time that they need to recoup. Both need to be rested for a family to work. You know that feeling when both you and your spouse, you look at each other on a Saturday morning and the one's wondering who's going to get out of bed. Who's going to get out of bed first? And then you try and make as if you're really tired and you roll over and you go, I'm really tired. And then hopefully Anna's going to get the hint and she rolls over and goes, well, I'm so tired. And there's this battle going on. We need to make time to rest. The W in S.L.O.W is we need to learn to wait for God's timing. Take a look at Psalm 27, verse 14. 2 more short scriptures and then we'll be finishing. Psalm 27, verse 14 says, wait for the Lord. Not rush the Lord. Wait for the Lord, be strong and take heart. And wait for the Lord. There's something about having to wait which causes us to stress. It drives us crazy, and when we're running at this pace, it's difficult. You know, it's a real art. You know, I love the British for this. You know, when there's a queue of 45 people and you've got bread and milk, and how the patience of the British, where they just queue quite happily. And being a South African, I find that extraordinary. And it doesn't go, it's not a surprise that at the moment, if you look at Bloomberg, the second most stressful country in the world is South Africa. There's a lot of South Africans in this church. Please bear with us. But the point is, it takes strength to be patient. It definitely takes a strength. You know, even as kids, when you're 8, you want to be 13, and then you want to be 18, and then after 30, you want to go backwards. But up until then, you're constantly pushing forward. Fast food, instant coffee, convenience, ready meals. Now, 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 now. We take ethical and moral shortcuts because we're impatient. God knows what you need and when you need it. Psalm 23, the Message translation, is quite special. It says, God, my shepherd, I don't need a thing. You have bedded me down in lush meadows. You find me quiet pools to drink from. True to your word, you let me catch my breath and send me in the right direction. You know, something about impatience is that if you're impatient, is that you might be moving in the wrong direction. How many times have you reacted through impatience and then regretted the action? So, how do we get from burnout to balance? We need to learn how to slow things down. We need to stop the constant push for more. If we're ambitious, we need to make sure that our ambition has boundaries. We need to learn how to say no, even in church, even to our friends in church. We need to obey the 4th commandment. God rested. We need physical, emotional, and spiritual recovery every week. And we need to wait to learn for God's timing. It takes faith to be patient, but it's worth it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I found it so refreshing myself. I'll make just 2 comments and then we'll have a final song. I would like just to recommend to the congregation 2 books that have helped me in this area, that are spiritual books about these kinds of issues. And one is a classic that was written probably over 30 years ago called Ordering Your Private World. It's by a chap called Gordon MacDonald, and there are newer editions than the one I read many years ago. But Ordering Your Private World is a spiritual book. It talks a lot about the Sabbath principle. We don't believe in a Sabbath in the same way that the Israelites did, but the principle of rest and how we do that is I found that book personally very helpful. And the other is the book I'm reading right now. It's called Refuel, and it's written by Kate Middleton. Not that one, a different one. And she is a Christian psychologist and writes on these kind of issues of refueling. And I've just been reading a chapter or 2 on 1 Kings 19, interestingly enough, about how God is compassionate with Elijah as he works through his emotional and spiritual exhaustion. And I'm still reading that book, but I'm halfway through. It's one of the few books where I'm making notes as I go along, because it's very meaningful to me as well. So I can recommend those if they help you, great. If not, that's fine. I'm sure we can help each other with these kinds of things. But thank you, Marlon, because it was spiritual, it was biblical, and it was practical. I think we all gained a lot.